Hey guys, I'm Jason White. This is my channel, Jason's Weird Reads. And this video, I'm going to discuss, and I was thinking I might make this a series, because there's a lot of what I think is underappreciated horror. And so this is what I'm going to call Lost Gems, underhyped horror books. So this is the first 5, if I decide to do this again. And if not, well then, this is the 5 that I think at least perhaps most predominantly. And I have some pretty popular authors here. So first, I'm going to go with Dead Sea by Tim Curran. Dead Sea is it's very much strange horror. It takes place in the Bermuda Triangle, and Tim Curran, if you haven't read Tim Curran, I highly recommend that you go check him out regardless, because he is very good at creating creepy scenes, and he's also very good at creating monsters. And his monsters are in full display in this book. So definitely check out Dead Sea by Tim Curran. There is a bit of a lag in that book. It sort of slows down in the middle part. But, you know, if you're having fun, that really doesn't matter. And I sort of blew through this book. It's pretty thick, but it's a lot of fun, so you definitely need to check that out. Number 4 is Poes Children, which is an anthology of short stories, and it's edited by Peter Straub. And the reason why I put this here is because if you go looking at all of the reviews on Amazon, Goodreads, wherever, this book has a really low rating, and I really don't understand why that is. The books, or the stories in this anthology, they're all of a literary type horror. And I think maybe that's the reason why, because even though there's some dispute as whether or not literary horror exists or not, that's actually a good idea for a video, because I think there is differences. But it comes down to style and the way it's written. But these are definitely more of the literary type stories, and I think when people, they're like, oh, Edgar Allan Poe stories, you know, written by other people, they're expecting more in-your-face jump scare type things, when instead you're going through these slow burn type horror stories, and so I think it confused people, perhaps. So maybe it was the marketing, I don't know, but basically the concept of the anthology is modern Poe writers, and why you could consider them as modern Edgar Allan Poe writers. It's a very good anthology. I love it. There's some favorite stories of mine in there. Number 3 is Enter Night by Michael Rowe, and I have this one with me. I've talked about this recently. I believe I read the first few paragraphs in the Popcorn Paragraph book tag. This book, it's also a slow burn. Michael Rowe is a Canadian writer. He lives up in Toronto, and he is a phenomenal writer. I really enjoyed this book, and you know, we've talked a few times in Toronto, and he's a really cool person too. But Enter Night, despite its name, which could confuse some readers with the Metallica song, this book is it's a vampire story, and it's sort of a family drama as well. It takes place in Ontario, I believe, way up north in Ontario, and I believe it takes place in a fictional town, though it's been a while since I've read this, so I could be wrong. But nobody talks about this book, and they should be, because it's phenomenal. I highly recommend it. If you like Anne Rice type of this is by no means Anne Rice. It's in its own class. But it's just as good as that type. What I'm getting at is this is more of a horror story than Anne Rice, but it has that sort of slow burn that Interview with the Vampire did. But it has that sort of family dynasty sort of feel to it, and that's the only reason why I would compare it to that. It's very good writing and characterization and setting, and I loved it, and it's a really, really good part of the vampire canon, which is huge. Another book, number 2, is one that I talk about a lot here. It's one by Caitlín or Kiernan that isn't talked about a lot. A lot of people talk about The Drowning Girl, which is another really good one. But if I were to choose between The Drowning Girl and The Red Tree, I'd always go with The Red Tree. I really love that story. It's a little more subtle. It's sort of the same concept as The Drowning Girl, but this one is more subtle, and it's definitely... Okay, it's not definitely, but in my mind it's more haunting. And I just really enjoyed this book. Nobody really ever mentions it when they talk, especially when they're talking about Caitlín or Kiernan's work. Drowning Girl sort of took over that. And it's a good book, as I said, but I don't understand why that is. I think, you know, when talking about horror, especially like with The Red Tree and The Drowning Girl, you could compare those stories to the quiet sort of horror, psychological horror that Shirley Jackson was known for. And so that, you know, in my mind is high praise. People should be reading this stuff. And number 1 is from a very famous writer. And yet whenever anyone talks about Stephen King, they never ever talk about From a Buick 8. At least not that I've seen or heard. This book is, you know, maybe one reason for that is because it's basically about like a possessed police car in this case. But, you know, when you think of Stephen King and possessed cars, you think of Christine. But this is, he got criticized, I think, for this, and after this book he said he was going to retire because he couldn't come up with any more original content. And that's not true. I mean, yeah, it's another haunted car story, but it's very different from Christine. And actually, I haven't read Christine, so I can't say that for sure, but I've seen the movie, and I'm pretty sure the movie is at least a decent representation of the book, I'm assuming. But this is very different from that story. And, you know, I just really enjoyed the ride. So definitely check out A Buick 8. It's a good book. It features, let me read you the synopsis. In a secret shed behind the barracks of the Pennsylvania State Police, Troop D, there's a cherry Buick Roadmaster no one has touched in years, because there's power under the hood. More power under the hood than anyone can handle. And, yeah, it's basically within the Troop D of the Pennsylvania State Police. There's a rookie who joins with them, and he gets very curious about the Buick that's in that shed, and shenanigans ensue. So, yeah, if you haven't read this book by Stephen King, then, yeah, definitely check it out. It's, I think, one of his best. Alright, that's my my first top 5 of underrated horror books. Please let me know what you think. Tell me what you think is an underrated horror book, and maybe I'll feature it in another video. So keep being creative, and I will catch you in the next bookish video.